I deep dived into some of the biggest producers' music on the planet, and I discovered 7 vocal tricks they're using to keep their listeners hooked. And what you're about to learn will instantly improve your music regardless of whether you're producing melodic house, pop music, or even industrial techno without any vocals.
What?
That's right, including vocals in your music makes it instantly more relatable for listeners, even if it's just a subtle vocal texture rather than a full-on lead vocal. You'll also learn how to implement each of these vocal techniques and which of them you should use for your genre, because they're not all applicable to every genre out there. Now, these techniques have helped my accelerator students get signed to some of the world's biggest labels, so they will work for you too. Okay, let's jump into vocal trick number 1. So the first vocal trick is to thicken up existing vocals into a rich, lovely vocal stack that just massages your eardrums. It's particularly useful if you are having your vocals in a prominent role, like in a pop track or a vocal-led dance track. Now, if you're producing a track with a singer, of course, you can ask that singer to take multiple takes, record harmonies, ad-libs, that kind of stuff. But what happens if you're just using splice vocal or a loop cloud vocal and you've only got the lead vocal? So your vocals can sound a bit empty like this. Well, here's how you make it into a full vocal stack. The first thing we're going to look at is creating a double. And what you can do is you can create a new audio channel. You can just duplicate your lead vocal, and that's going to be our double. Now, at first, if it's exactly the same, all it's going to do is just sound like it's twice as loud.
If I say goodbye, if I say goodbye,
so that's off.
Then make me a liar. Make me a liar.
It's just louder, okay? So there's no discrepancy between the two signals, so we need to add some. Now, the easiest and quickest way to do that, I've found, is to add a groove template. So in Ableton, it's called a groove template. In other DAWs, there are different versions of this, but basically it's going to push this slightly off the grid in certain places, which means it's going to give the impression that it's being sung in slightly different times. So that's the first thing we can do to create a slight difference.
If I say goodbye,
and we can hear
me a liar.
Now it's sounding like there's some slight chorus applied, which is what we want. But we want to make those discrepancies slightly bigger. So the second thing we can do is we can detune this second one slightly as well.
If I say goodbye, then make me a liar. Make me a liar.
So you can hear we're now increasing that variation between the two signals, thus making it sound richer and more like a real double. But the beauty of that is, once you've done that, you can use something like this Ozone Imager, which is completely free, and what it's going to do is create a stereo signal around that mono, which it originally is. So if we play it, we can see it's mono. So if we hit the stereoize button, open it up, and spread the width. So when we have that doubled up with the lead vocal,
if I say goodbye, then make me
listen how wide it sounds now. But that's barely the start. So we can create also another duplication, and I'm going to call this D. And all I've done for this, if we go into it, is use Warp Mode Complex Pro if you're using Ableton, but if you're using a different DAW, there's going to be something equivalent, and it's basically the warp mode that creates the least artifacts when you change the pitch. Now, I've taken this down 12 semitones, so that's one whole octave, and then you can tweak the formants to get it sounding how you want. So let's listen to this. Sounds a bit weird,
make me a liar, make me a liar.
But listen to that when we feed it in slightly under the lead vocal and the double vocal.
If I say goodbye, then make me a liar. Make me a liar.
It just makes it thicker and richer and just sound a lot more powerful. So the last thing I want to show you on this particular point is creating harmonies. Now, the easiest way to do this is, of course, to have a singer sing those harmonies. But again, if you don't have that, you can create it from the single stem. So in Ableton, the way that you would do that, you would have to, again, choose Complex Pro mode as your warp mode, and then split your lead vocal into every different note that he or she is singing. And then in Ableton, you can adjust the pitch of each separate clip, as you can see here. Now, I would usually use Melodyne to do this because it's going to have a smoother finish, but when it's all in with everything else, you can't really hear it that much anyway. So let's just have a listen to the harmony I've made, and I've created a different note for each note that she is singing. And let's listen to it with the lead vocal. Well, let's listen to it on its own.
If I say goodbye, then make me a liar. Make me a liar.
So it doesn't sound amazing. You can hear glitches and whatnot, but I'm hitting the right notes. So now let's play it with the lead.
If I say goodbye, then make me a liar. make me a liar.
So let's listen to the full track. First, I'm going to play it with what we started with, then I'm going to add in the other elements as well. So let's be honest, it still sounds cool, but wait when we get everything else in. Ready? Let's do it. Oh, it's so nice, listen. Whew. That's a tune. Okay, the second vocal trick is to use vocals as an instrument. Now, a great example of this is in Major Lazer and DJ Snake's track Lean On. Okay, so first let's listen to our track. It's obviously influenced by the DJ Snake track, and we can hear that with the plucks.
Why do you do this when in the moment couldn't see your behavior was toxic
Beats.
for me? Eternal optimist, I make the best of it. Couldn't see your behavior was toxic for me.
Okay, so at that point we want a vocal chop riff to come in, and here's how you do it. I've created a MIDI channel here. Let's just get rid of the sampler on there and we can do it all from scratch. And then we need to pick a note from our lead vocal that has a nice, well, that's just hitting one pitch and that has a nice timbre to it. So let's just have a listen to some of the singing.
Couldn't see your, I make the best of, could,
I quite like the k for could,
could.
because that'll make a nice musical instrument out of that note. So what we do is just grab that note, we just consolidate that little bit, and then we create a sampler. Now, it doesn't matter which sampler you use. I'm using the Ableton stock one, but Contact's another great sampler you can use, but you can use any stock sampler really. And now we can drag in that vocal into our sampler, and then we can control it like this. And now we've got our vocal chop instrument, but it's not quite finished yet because we have to make sure that's in tune with the rest of the track, because this note here is unlikely to have been C, and the default tuning for any sampler is usually middle C. So the way that we can check that is you can either do it by your ear, and if we listen to a MIDI instrument, that's always going to be tuned correctly. So we'll just play C in this one. Do 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 do. And if we hit that same note, is our vocal chop hitting that same note? Do do do. No, it's not. So the way we can check that visually is if we go to a tuner and put that on there, we can see it's tuned to G. That means that note that she's singing is a G. So what we need to do is now select the changing of that root and change it to G. And now that's going to be in tune. And we can check that audibly again. See, same note. And now we can just jam along in the same key and play our vocal chop riff. Last thing I like to do is within the sampler, if you choose your pitch bend range to be 12, that means that you can pitch bend it with the pitch bend wheel very easily up or down an entire octave. So let's jam along and let's see how this sounds. We'll start the vocal chop riff here, I think. So some nice cool little bits in there, and that's how you create a vocal chop riff. Okay, the third vocal trick that producers use is something I found out from Timbaland and Justin Timberlake tracks, and yes, whilst they may still be a few years old, it's a really cool trick that can just enhance your rhythm section, and that's using vocals as percussion. So what I like to do is have a separate MIDI channel with a drum rack on it, and I've saved out this drum rack with just lots of little vocal samples that I've collected from vocals that I've recorded over the years, male, female, but just short little noises and hits and breaths and stuff like that to use as drum hits. So if we go into the MIDI and we can see here, I'm just using the 16th notes. So that is to say, if this bar is split into 14 sections, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, etc. That's where all the fun happens. And then we can have them interplay with the drum sounds that we've got. So they just add like an extra human element to the drums, and altogether you can really hear it just adds something extra. So really subtle, but such a powerful tool, and altogether with the rest of the track it sounds like this. That's a cool track actually. I'm going to link to the full video for this one here. Okay, the next vocal trick is an absolute classic, and this can really help tie different sections of your track together. That's using reverse reverb. A classic example of this is in the Prodigy's track Firestarter. Okay, so here's the track we're going to be working with, and you'll hear that the vocals come in after a couple of bars. So we want those to be more smoothly introduced. So the first thing we need to do is create an audio channel, just a blank audio channel, and then get the first syllable of your vocal lead line. And that is this one. And we just want the first note. I don't really like that glitchy at the beginning. So I'll just take the note itself like so. And then I'm just going to paste that on the new channel. Now we need to silence everything else. So just solo that new channel. Like so, and we need to have a nice reverb on there. So I'm going to just use the stock reverb, but it doesn't matter, just use your favorite reverb. We'll put it to 100% wet, and then we are going to increase the decay to be fairly long, maybe 4 or 5 seconds. That already sounds cool, kind of like ghosts from Mars. So we've got that sound. Next thing we need to do is create another audio channel, like so, and we'll take the input of that one from this reverb one. I'm just going to call that Vox Reverb because that's what it is. And then we'll take the input from that channel here. We can arm that track, and then we are just going to record it and let that reverb play out. And there it dies out. And this is going to be our reverse reverb. So now we can delete this first track that we created, and we're just left with this one. What I'm going to do is just press R to reverse that, and now we have our reverse reverb. I'm going to pull it back a bit before our lead vocal starts. I'm going to time it so the loudest part kind of hits where the beginning of the vocals start, and then I'll just fade out the second part of it, like so. So let's reduce the volume a bit and then listen to it leading into those vocals. Cool. So with everything else, we can adjust the length of this if we want. We can actually use a fade to help with that. And then with everything else, it sounds like this. That's how you do reverse reverbs, an absolutely essential trick for any music producer to know. Now this next vocal trick really is essential, I think, for any music producer in any genre, and that's using a vocal atmosphere or sound bed. As I said, you can use this in any genre from pop music, trance music, techno, but here's how you do it. Okay, so this is our track as it stands. A nice melodic house, floaty vocals. So let's make this vocal sound bed that's going to just tie everything together. So I'm going to create a new audio track like so. And then we want to find a part of our vocals that is just going to be quite subtle, like this. I think this bit sounds nice. So we're just going to take that tiny bit And this is a hallmark of amateur producers, is when they try and add loads of extra sounds into their track, whereas I'm a great believer in what I call timbral cohesion, which basically means creating sounds from the core sounds that you've already got in the track by using things like reverb, delay, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing in this. So we've got this little loop. So let's just repeat it, and it's going to sound exactly as you'd expect. Not great. So next thing we need to do is put a reverb on the channel itself, and that's going to really smooth it back in the mix. 100% wet, and now let's have a listen to it. And then we can take out the frequencies we don't need. And then we can even feed some of it out to an auxiliary channel just to make it even more washed out. If there's a reverb on there, like so. And now let's bring it up underneath everything else and hear how it sounds. It's just subtle, but that's off. It's a bit empty. And that's on, it just ties everything together. Okay, the next is to use vocals as a synth, or more technically speaking, using vocoders. Now this technique's been around for decades, but here's an example in a Calvin Harris track, which I think sounds really cool.
So tell me how deep is your love, can it go deep?
Hear how it sounds like the synth's almost singing to you, and here's how you do it. Okay, so for this one, you need a vocal, obviously. So this is the vocal that we have got for our track. So we want to now make that sound like a synthesizer is kind of singing that in the same way as that Calvin Harris example. So what I've done is created a new MIDI track. I've just loaded Serum into it, but you can use any synth at all. And let's just hear what that sounds like. It's just a saw wave with some detune to make it sound a bit thicker. Now what we need to do is create a vocoder on the vocal channel. So I've just dragged one on and turn it on like this. And then we have to choose the carrier to be an external source, which is going to be the synthesizer. And then we can choose the synthesizer from the drop-down menu. And whichever DAW and vocoder you're using, it's going to have very similar workflow to how you set this up. So now we can hear the vocals. And if we press the keys of the synth, we should hear that vocal singing at the same time. We can hear it very faintly, and it's kind of being washed out and lost behind the synth itself because the synth is still being heard. So what we need to do is change this output from master channel to sends only. And that means we'll only hear that synth when it's being played through that vocoder. But we have to play chords as we are playing the track, otherwise we're not going to hear those vocals sing. So with everything else, let's have a listen to it. Nice. And then of course you can program that MIDI in, or you can play it in, whichever you prefer. And then that's going to play every time the track loops around. So you don't actually have to be playing your keyboard each time. A really cool effect. Again, this can work in any genre, but it doesn't just have to be with vocals. So I've linked a video there where it shows you how to do it with drums as well, which is really interesting. Okay, this last vocal tip is a bit more of an old school approach, and it can give quite a trippy vibe, but I really love it. It was very popular in trance, but here's an example of it being used in Breakbeat by Bicep. here's how you do it. So this is what our track sounds like at the moment. That really nice old school rave feel, but we want to add some of these transforming effects to the vocals. So what we're going to do is create a MIDI channel, and I'm just going to call this trigger. I always call my gating trigger channels just trigger, because then I can easily see what's going on. And then we are just going to program in a little MIDI pattern on the 16th notes. And it doesn't matter which sound you use, as long as it's very easily controllable. So I just use a sine wave or a saw wave, maximum sustain, minimum release, so we can turn it on and off really quickly, well, almost minimum release, and a very fast attack. And then every time our MIDI note ends, that's how long the note's going to be. So if you want some of them longer, you can make them longer. Like so. Now, once you've done that, we need to send that trigger to start ducking the vocals. And the way that you do that is load in a gate like this, or a noise gate. And then you need to turn on the sidechain control. And again, it doesn't matter which gate you're using, there will always be a sidechain input. And then we can take the audio from our trigger channel like so. And now this trigger is going to be ducking or closing that noise gate. And we're going to get this effect. And you have to choose the threshold and just tweak it till it's the sweet spot. And then you can tweak the attack, hold and release as well. If you want to tighten it up or smooth it out a bit. So you've got control then. And then add the effects as you see fit. Make sure that your trigger is then set to sends only, otherwise you'll also hear that beeping sound. And then you've got the vibes. Nice. Now there's something else I've mentioned that all of these techniques really hinge upon, but we're going to touch upon that in a couple of minutes. But first, which of these techniques should you be using in your music, and does it even matter? Well, it depends, and here's why. Our main goal with music is to express emotions through our music and then hope other people will be able to feel those same emotions too. What a beautiful sentiment, Will. So if one of these techniques is going to take away from our main vibe or emotion, for example, using a happy melodic vocal chop riff in a dark industrial techno track, then we shouldn't use it. It would be like going into a steakhouse and being served with a vegetarian curry. There'd be a mismatch of expectations, and not in a good way. But remember, the caveat is, if you experiment, you might stumble across something that does help you convey the vibe that you want to even more strongly. And by now, hopefully you realize you can use these either subtly or more extreme. So it depends on your personal taste. Now, you can have the best creative vocal production in the world, but if you get this next thing wrong, it's all gonna be for nothing. Can you guess what it is? Yeah, it's mixing your vocals so they sit perfectly in your mix and actually sound good. Luckily, it's pretty simple, and I've developed a 5-step processing chain that's going to make any vocal sound 100% better, maybe 200% even. Anyway, if you want to learn how to get your vocals sounding clear, powerful and clean, and sitting perfectly with everything else in your mix, then you can check out that video I made right there. It's a good one, even if I do say so myself, so I'll catch you over there.